I'm going to start this video with a question. Why is rent so high? Now, as a professional, I want to say rent is so high because of competition. I want to say that prices are set because of a fair marketplace, and this is just where prices have. We now know that many large landlords use an algorithm created by RealPage and sold to multiple large landlords across the United States. And this algorithm used information that was private, and they basically used it against all renters. So the Department of Justice plus a number of states have joined together, and they sued RealPage because of these unfair practices that have created super high rent prices. There are a few other states, such as New Jersey, that have their own separate lawsuit against RealPage and about 10 landlords. So let's see what the Department of Justice has to say.
Addressed by Section 1 of the Act is the elimination of competition that would otherwise exist, including competition on prices. When the Sherman Act was passed, an anti-competitive scheme might have looked like robber barons shaking hands at a secret meeting. Today, it looks like landlords using mathematical algorithms to align their rents. But antitrust law does not become obsolete simply because competitors find new ways to unlawfully act in concert. And Americans should not have to pay more in rent simply because a company has found a new way to scheme with landlords to break the law. So today, after a nearly 2-year investigation, the Justice Department, joined by 8 states, has sued RealPage, a commercial real estate software company, for violating the Sherman Antitrust Act. RealPage sells landlords what it calls, quote, revenue management software. We allege that this software is developed, marketed, and sold to enable landlords to sidestep vigorous competition in the rental market. Competing landlords agree to submit to RealPage on a daily basis their most sensitive, non-public information, including rental.
Just to put things in perspective for you, if I'm buying a house, I can go on a website, I can look up a zip code, and I can see what houses have sold for in that zip code, right? So these websites, Zillow and Trulia, all these websites where you go to look for houses, you can see houses that are for sale, but you can also see houses that were recently sold. And most importantly, you see the price that they sold for. So I can use that information with a property owner to buy a house, right? I can use information that's public information to negotiate in the open market to purchase a house. Now, when you look at rentals, think about this. If you ever looked for a rental, you can go on these same websites and you can see apartments that are for rent, but you can't see what they rented for, or if any concessions were given. And a concession would be something free. Like if you rent from me and you sign a 13-year lease, I'll give you 1 month free and free parking, right? That's a concession. And that's information that RealPage was using just for themselves to input into this algorithm, and then it would sell this information to these large landlords.
Lease terms and projected vacancies. RealPage then combines this data from competing landlords and feeds it into an algorithm that provides real-time pricing recommendations back to the competing landlords. But as we allege, these are more than just recommendations. RealPage actively polices landlords' compliance with those recommendations. It also monitors landlords' other policies by, for example, trying to stop concessions that landlords use to attract or retain renters. A large number of landlords effectively agree to outsource their pricing decisions to RealPage by using a, quote, auto accept setting. which effectively permits RealPage to determine the price a renter will pay. Landlords understand what their arrangement with RealPage gets them. As one said, quote, "I always like this product because your algorithm uses proprietary data from other subscribers to suggest rents and terms. That's classic price fixing," close quote.
Proprietary data, meaning this is data that's only available to them. But this data comes from all of us who sign leases. That information was inputted into a system and then sold to other landlords. That information was kept from other renters, which makes the system unfair. How am I going into a transaction with no knowledge, nowhere to find the knowledge of what other apartments in this area has sold for, and if there were any concessions given when those apartments were rented? It creates an unfair.
And RealPage understands what it's doing too. In advertising its service to landlords, RealPage frequently says that a, quote, "rising tide raises all ships." As a RealPage vice president explained, this phrase means that, quote, "there is greater good in everybody succeeding versus essentially trying to compete against one another." But essentially trying to compete against one another is what our free market economy is all about. And ensuring such competition is what our
I just wanted to stop it right there really quick because I wanted to add that, especially in real estate, we need a fair market. We need, or renters need, to be able to know how much are apartments being rented for in this building compared to how much apartments are being rented for in that. What RealPage essentially did was created such an unfair market where only the landlords benefited. So if you caught what he said, they created a marketplace where landlords' information that they have with tenants was only shared with other landlords, and it enabled all landlords to charge higher rent. To answer the question, why is rent so high? We now know rent is so high because of an algorithm that use all rental information from actual renters and tenants against renters and tenants. And the only winners were the landlords. So the Department of Justice sued RealPage. There was a settlement in November of 2020. Based on the settlement, RealPage had to make some changes to their software, and certain prices and certain information is not, or supposed to not be, available to landlords. So now, how can you negotiate your rent, and how can you put yourself in a position of power, right? One of the ways I would say that you can negotiate for yourself to get lower rent for yourself, and sometimes it may not be just about lower rent, but better terms, right? Because everything is negotiable. Even what day of the month your rent is paid is something that you can negotiate. You can negotiate with the landlord to say, hey, can my rent be due on the 10th? The 10th of every month, can I pay my rent? That is something that you can do, and something that you can negotiate with your landlord, especially if your payday is closer to the 10th than it is the 1st, right? Another thing you can do to negotiate on your behalf is to be ready to, you are in a better position to negotiate when you have all of your ducks in a row. You already know what your credit score is. You already know what your income is. You already have the security deposit, first month's rent already put. The more ready you are when it comes to negotiating with the landlord, the better a position you'll be in when dealing with the landlord. I hope this information was useful. Please stay tuned for more videos.